Hi everyone, tonight we're going to begin with a memory that still smells like drugstore flowers and disappointment. You might think your birthday is safe territory, but if someone ever tells you to dress nice and bring your purse, double check their trunk first. So before you feel like you're settling in for just another bedtime story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing all the little lights across the map. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. I was 63 and still brushed my hair like it made a difference. That morning, I wore my softest blue sweater, the one with tiny pearl buttons and a snag under the right cuff I never bothered fixing. I even put on mascara, though my lashes had long since decided to retire. It was my birthday, and for some reason, I still held on to the ritual of hope. My son Isaac had called the night before with a vague promise of lunch and a surprise. I should have known better. Surprises from Isaac rarely felt like gifts. When he rang the doorbell, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, smiling like a fool heart, fluttering like I was 15 again, waiting on a prom date. He stood there with that crooked, boyish grin that once meant scraped knees or hidden bad grades. "Happy birthday, Mum," he said, holding a limp bouquet that looked like it had fought traffic and lost. I didn't let the tight hug fool me. He was stiff, his arms light, his eyes elsewhere. "Get dressed," he said. "Made a reservation." He didn't say where. I didn't ask. I slid into my low heels that always pinched, grabbed my little purse, and we were off. I chatted nervously in the car, weather church, gossiped the neighbour's new mailbox, until I noticed we weren't heading toward town. Instead, we veered off the highway onto a long, tree-lined driveway. The maple leaves were turning orange, rust, and gold. Beautiful. Deceptive. A sign above read, "Willow Glen Senior Living." My stomach sank like a stone in a still pond. I turned to him. "Isaac, what is this?" He cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk. Those 5 words should be outlawed." He went on about safety living alone, memory lapses. "You forgot your gas bill last month," he added like that justified relocation. "What memory lapses?" I snapped. My voice echoed in the enclosed car like a slap. He wouldn't look at me. "It's a good place, comfortable. You'll make friends." I let out a laugh, bitter and hollow. On my birthday, he stepped out and popped the trunk. Inside was my suitcase, packed, neat. "You went through my things. Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I sat locked in the kind of silence that only betrayal can shape. He spoke to the receptionist. There was paperwork, a clipboard with signatures, power of attorney, my name in his handwriting across the top. I didn't even know he had a pen that nice. They led me to a room with beige walls and a bed that rose and lowered like an obedient dog. There was a small window. It faced a brick wall. "Happy birthday to me." I sat there for what felt like years, coat still on purse, still in my lap. The flowers he brought were drooping. I stared at them like they might explain something. That night, I heard distant television static, someone coughing down the hall, and the soft squeak of orthopedic soles on vinyl floors. The mattress was too firm. The sheets smelled like bleach and starch. I closed my eyes, but sleep refused me the courtesy. You know, they say with age comes wisdom. What they don't mention is how often that wisdom is ignored by your own children. And speaking of things people ignore, did you know lobsters taste with their legs? Completely irrelevant, but so is my son's logic for committing me on my birthday. By morning, I still hadn't cried. I just sat on the edge of the bed, wondering if the ache in my chest was heartbreak or just my 3rd cup of decaf. The next morning came slow, like it didn't really want to show up either. I stared at the beige ceiling, counting the small hairline cracks like constellations. I still hadn't taken off my coat. It smelled faintly like my old laundry detergent lavender and lemon, a scent I suddenly wanted to wrap myself in and vanish. Breakfast was served at 7. Not in bed, not with a candle, just a tray delivered by a nurse who smiled like she had someplace better to be. Scrambled eggs, rubbery. Toast, soggy. Applesauce, of all things. I stared at it like it was a science experiment. I didn't touch a bite. Instead, I walked the halls like a ghost. The place was eerily quiet, save for the occasional shouts of the television in the rec room and the hum of wheelchairs rolling over linoleum. I passed a bulletin board decorated with faded construction paper leaves and a schedule of activities: bingo chair yoga film night featuring driving Miss Daisy naturally. I felt like I had entered a sitcom where the punchline had already been delivered and I was just left with the laugh track. My roommate's name was Doris. She had the energy of a sleeping cat and the snore of a chainsaw. She didn't say much, but when she did, it was always about her daughter in Phoenix, who hadn't visited since 2012. I envied Doris a little. At least she expected nothing. I tried to stay sharp. Did the crossword puzzles they left by the nurse's station. Watched the news in the common area with 3 other residents who fell asleep halfway through a segment about inflation. Speaking of which, did you know during the Roman Empire, they inflated currency by melting down silver coins and mixing them with cheaper metals? It didn't end well for them, and frankly, it didn't look great for my retirement plan either. But none of it helped. The feeling sat heavy on my chest, like someone had rewritten my story while I was napping. My son had packed my suitcase, signed my name, moved me here under the guise of safety. And the worst part, everyone else bought it. The nurses called me sweetheart. They spoke slowly used short sentences like I was a toddler with a head cold. No one asked what I did before. No one cared that I'd taught art history at a community college for 22 years, or that I once painted a mural that still lives on the side of a library downtown. Here I was, just Eleanor. Room 204, medium full risk, quiet compliant. Until I wasn't. It started on the second day. I skipped lunch, then dinner. Not to make a statement, I just couldn't eat. The food was tasteless, and my appetite had curled up somewhere out of reach. But by morning, 3 the nurses started noticing. "You all right, hun?" one asked as she scribbled something on her clipboard. I nodded. Just thinking. She smiled, like that was cute. That's when Lila walked in. Young, warm brown skin, tight braids, pinned neatly under a scrub cap, and eyes that actually saw you. Not through you, not past you, at you. She looked like someone who hadn't yet learned to give up. She checked my blood pressure and said, "You don't belong here." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She shrugged. "You don't seem lost. Most people come in already half gone. You've got all your lights on." It wasn't flattery. It wasn't pity. It was observation, and it nearly cracked me open. That afternoon she returned with something in her hand. "I found this while cleaning out Mr. Anthony's things," she said. No next of kin claimed it. It was a lottery ticket. Slightly wrinkled, folded in half, dated 2 weeks earlier. I laughed. "You want me to play the Powerball from a ghost?" She grinned. "Why not? You've got time and the world owes you one." It was absurd. Ridiculous. I tucked it in my cardigan pocket anyway. That night, when the hallways were quiet and Doris was sawing logs behind me, I tiptoed to the ancient desktop computer in the lounge. It whined to life like it hadn't been used since the Clinton administration. I typed in the numbers. Once, then again, then again. Then I just stared at the screen, because they matched. Every single number. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. My heart beat so fast it felt like I'd swallowed a hummingbird. It wasn't joy I felt. It was terror. Pure electric fear. $12 million. If Isaac ever found out, if anyone found out, I'd be back in a locked room faster than you could say state-mandated guardianship. I printed the confirmation, folded it neatly, and tucked it where no nurse would dare to look. And for the first time since arriving, I slept. Not well, but with a plan. The next morning I moved differently. I brushed my teeth with intention, even though the mirror lighting in the bathroom was so harsh it could have grilled a cheese sandwich. I smoothed my hair with hands that had stopped shaking. I folded my sweater carefully before changing like someone who still had ownership over small things. Because I did. I owned something now, something big enough to change the rest of my life. At breakfast, I smiled at the soggy toast and tapped my spoon twice on the applesauce just for fun. No one noticed. That was fine. It gave me room to breathe, to plot, to prepare. Lila returned just after morning rounds. She glanced at me sideways, then leaned in. "You checked it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Just looked down at my lap. She whispered, "How much?" I held up fingers behind my cup like I was playing an illegal game of charades. 1, 2. Then spread them wide. She blinked. 12 million. I nodded. "Jesus," she said under her breath, then quickly followed it with "sorry." I leaned in. "I need help." She hesitated for half a second. "Okay." That was it. No conditions, no questions like "are you sure?" or "what if you're confused?" Just trust. I told her everything. Quietly. Precisely. She listened like someone who understood the weight of secrecy. When I mentioned that my son had signed over legal papers behind my back, her eyes narrowed. "That's elder abuse," she said. "The legal kind. The kind people don't talk about enough. Old age wisdom fact. In America, over 5 million elders are financially exploited each year, and most don't even realize it until it's too late. Academic debate, phrase 1, could argue that systemic oversight in elder care facilities enables this kind of manipulation. But I wasn't interested in theoretical arguments. I was living it. By mid-afternoon, Lila returned. "I know someone," she whispered. "He helps residents here with Will's legal stuff. Name's Mark Choi. Volunteer attorney, comes in every other Friday. He's clean smart. Quiet. That word again, quiet. It's what they assume you want when you're old. But I didn't want quiet. I wanted out. 2 days passed like honey dripping from a spoon. I played the part, ate half a muffin, smiled at the hallway nurse, read a romance novel with a shirtless pirate on the cover. Theatrics. Mark arrived that Friday just before lunch, wearing a navy blazer and wireframe glasses that made him look 10 years older than he probably was. I'd have questioned his credibility if Lila hadn't vouched for him. We met in the cramped conference room just past the rec area, the one with a sticky table and a clock that ticked louder than most conversations. He sat, opened a legal pad and waited. I didn't hesitate. "Mark, I need to disappear." To his credit, he didn't blink. He just uncapped his pen. "Start at the beginning." So I did. The betrayal, the lottery ticket, the facility, the power of attorney forged with shaky justifications and smooth legal ink. My identity, my freedom, all wrapped up in someone else's version of what love looks like when it's afraid of inconvenience. Mark was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Then we'll need to work fast." Over the next 2 hours, he explained what had to be done. A temporary legal trust with new identification, a secure mailing address, a financial advisor on retainer, transfer of funds into an account with blind ownership. "You'll need to cut digital ties," he warned. "No credit cards, no old logins, no phone. Your son's already moved once without your permission. Don't give him a breadcrumb trail." Lila peeked in near the end of our meeting with a styrofoam cup of bad coffee and eyes full of questions. She didn't speak, just nodded once when I gave her a thumbs up. After Mark left, I returned to my room and opened the drawer beneath the window. I folded 2 pairs of slacks, a nightgown, and the only photo I had of my late husband, a picture of us in 1984 standing in front of a rotisserie chicken truck. He was laughing, and I looked like I wasn't sure what was happening. It was perfect. I packed the bouquet Isaac had brought, now dried and crumbling, just to remind myself that some gifts aren't what they seem. The escape happened at 5:23 a.m. the next morning. Lila swiped me out using a staff badge. I wore someone else's coat. My hair was under a knit cap. My gait, always slow, now made sense in the dark. No alarms, no questions, just the wind on my cheeks and the feel of a small duffel in my hand, holding what little I had left of my old life and everything I'd need for the next one. They thought I was just Eleanor from room 204. They thought I was confused, quiet, manageable, but I was none of those things. I was about to become a ghost with $12 million. I rode the bus out of Georgia like a ghost, wrapped in thrift store layers and second-hand shoes that squeaked slightly with each step. The seat was itchy. The windows were dirty. But the hum of the engine was a lullaby I hadn't heard in years, one that whispered, "You did it." Nobody asked me where I was going. Nobody cared. That's the great thing about bus stations. They're full of people trying to forget or be forgotten. I didn't know exactly where I'd end up. Mark had mentioned a place in rural Alabama, something off-grid, a fixer-upper that came with a working heater and just enough land to keep the neighbors away. It sounded perfect. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't going somewhere. I was going anywhere but back. The house looked exactly like it had in the email attachments. One-story brick chipped white shutters and a mailbox that leaned slightly left like it had a secret. The front porch creaked with every step, and the key taped under a loose board, like a movie cliché, slid into the lock as if even the door had been waiting. Inside smelled like dustwood polish and something faintly citrus. Someone had cleaned. Probably Mark's people. The lights worked. The water ran. The heater sighed to life with a wheeze. I dropped my bag and stood still, letting the silence crawl into my bones. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar, and watched the trees move like slow dancers. I didn't feel safe yet. I felt unchained. Which isn't the same thing, but it's a start. I kept the lottery ticket in a fireproof box Mark had left in the closet, alongside the new trust paperwork, a flip phone, and a laminated card with emergency legal contacts. It felt more like a spy kit than a retirement plan. Day 2. I walked the property line, found a bent bird feeder, a rusted swing set, and a patch of stubborn daffodils that had come up early. I liked them. They didn't ask permission to bloom, they just did. By day 3, curiosity got the better of me. I powered up the burner laptop and created a fake Facebook account. I didn't use a photo, just a blank avatar, and a name I'd always liked, Rita Barnes. Rita was a woman who had been through things. Rita had opinions. I searched for my son, and there he was, Isaac Taylor, new profile picture, smiling on a dock holding a cup of craft coffee like he'd discovered meaning. He looked happy. Of course he did. I scrolled down and saw it. If anyone has seen my mother, Eleanor Taylor, please contact the Dayton police. We are worried about her safety. She is vulnerable and has recently been confused. A few things happened at once. My stomach turned, my fists clenched, and I laughed. Hard. The kind of laugh that doesn't sound human, the kind that echoes off dusty walls and means, "Oh, now you're scared." The comments rolled in like sympathy candy. Prayers for your family. I hope she's found safe. You're such a good son, Isaac. Good son, my God. But what really undid me was the photo he used in the post. It was from 5 years ago, my 58th birthday. We were at that lakeside diner with the squeaky booths and endless coffee. I had cake on my nose, and Isaac had his arm around me. We looked like a Hallmark card for healthy family dynamics. It's wild how easy it is to perform love in pictures. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept seeing that image of us frozen in time. Before I knew what he was capable of, before the signatures, before the facility. And then the weirdest thing happened. I remembered something, a phrase he'd used more than once in our last few phone calls. "You told me that already, Mom," or "You're repeating things a lot lately." Back then I brushed it off. Aging, maybe. Distraction. But now, with the benefit of betrayal, I saw it for what it was. Gaslighting. He'd been prepping the narrative for months, planting doubt. Not in himself, in me. Every subtle jab, every patronizing comment. He wanted me to question my memory so when the time came, I wouldn't resist the change. He wanted compliance disguised as concern. Old age wisdom. Sometimes the people who claim to know you best are really just experts at using your love against you. Quirky fact: octopuses have 3 hearts, and when they mate, the male dies shortly after. Apparently, betrayal exists even in the animal kingdom. That night I called Mark, told him everything. I need to update the will, I said. Make it airtight. He asked me the usual lawyer questions. Are you sure? Do you want to leave a symbolic dollar? No, I said. I want him to get nothing. Not a dollar, not a keepsake, not even a mention. Mark was quiet for a moment. Then done. It felt like sealing a letter I never wanted to write. But some things have to end before they rot the rest of your life. The next morning, I woke up before the sun and stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping tea and staring out at the dew-covered grass. I felt different. Not better. Not healed. But like I had slipped out of an old skin overnight, one that had stretched too thin for too long. The kettle hissed gently, the cat I didn't own yet scratched at the porch screen, and I felt something new bloom in the air resolve. That morning's mail brought the usual junk flyers, utility bills, and a plain white envelope with no return address. I almost tossed it in the recycling bin. But something about the weight of it, thicker paper, heavy ink, made my fingers twitch. I opened it and stared. Inside was a photocopy of a loan document, my signature, my late husband Richard's, and Isaac's, dated 12 years ago. The bank logo was real. The notary stamp looked legit. But here's the thing, I had never signed that loan. The loop in the G on my name was right, but too perfect, too clean, like someone had practiced it. And Richard, he hated paperwork. He would never have agreed to something without a full afternoon of groaning and pacing and using his serious voice. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, hands trembling. Mark had warned me this could happen. If Isaac starts feeling the heat, he'll make the first strike. Try to rattle you. Reclaim the narrative. I pulled out the fireproof box and started digging through the folder of financial records we'd pulled before I left the facility. Buried beneath old tax returns and insurance forms, I found them 3 more forged documents, all with my signature. None of which I remembered seeing, let alone signing. One of them was for a home equity line of credit. Another, tied to a small business Richard and I had co-founded in the 80s, a catering service that fizzled out but never technically dissolved. That explained it. The missing money, the tension in Richard's last few years, the awkward silences at dinner. He must have known, but said nothing. Maybe to protect me, maybe because he thought it would fix itself. Richard was good at denial. I loved him anyway, but Isaac. He wasn't denying anything. He was orchestrating it. I didn't cry, not even a little. Instead, I did what any woman in her 60s with a sharp mind and a laptop would do. I researched. 3 days straight. I barely ate, barely slept. I cross-referenced addresses, checked tax records, ran searches through public databases with Mark's access credentials. And there it was. Isaac had used my social security number to apply for credit cards. He'd filed false tax returns under my name, under Richard's name, after he died, and it seemed under the names of at least 2 other deceased relatives. Refunds, loans, deductions, inflated income, phony dependents, all pointing back to him. The IRS had flagged several filings over the past 3 years. I hadn't noticed, of course. Why would I? He'd been managing the mail, the taxes, the digital stuff. Just to help. He'd said, help, right. Academic debate phrase of the day, one could reasonably assert that trust when exploited systematically becomes a weapon more dangerous than outright theft. So now I had motive, method, and evidence. But I didn't want to call the police. Not yet. Because I didn't just want justice, I wanted silence. The kind that creeps into a guilty person's house late at night and presses on their chest like a ghost. So I waited. I documented everything. Printed out emails, scanned loan applications, labeled manila folders with dates, and read post-it tabs. I started recording audio notes on a little handheld recorder Mark gave me, not because I feared forgetting, but because I wanted my voice to be the one heard if anything ever happened. And then I made a choice. I mailed a copy of the entire folder anonymously to the Department of Justice. I didn't put my name on it. I didn't attach a return address. Just a note that said, "This is not fiction. This is not a mistake. Please investigate." Then I hid the original files under the hallway floorboards with the fireproof box, alongside the lottery ticket, alongside my new will, alongside a note labeled, "If found." I was not confused. By then, I was sleeping with one eye open. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Every car parked across the street too long got stared down through the curtains. One man came to the porch one afternoon, clipboard in hand, said he was taking a neighborhood survey. He smiled too much, asked if I lived alone. I told him I was armed and menopausal, and he left faster than he came. I called Mark that night. "We need to finish the trust," I told him. "I want layers, real insulation." He got to work. The funds were transferred. Accounts locked under blind shell companies. If Isaac tried to sniff out $1, he'd need a forensic team, a subpoena, and divine intervention. Old age wisdom. When someone shows you their true colors, stop arguing and start painting exit signs. And quirky fact of the day, wombat poop is cube-shaped. Nature has weird ways of leaving a trail. I figured I should too. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was becoming dangerous. I didn't plan to become a digital ghost, but it turns out erasing yourself is easier than you think, especially when nobody expects an old woman to be the one holding all the passwords. I changed everything. My Wi-Fi name became 404 Not Found. My fake Facebook account, Rita Barnes, started following obscure cooking pages and a knitting group for feral seniors. I even commented on a thread about heirloom tomatoes just to keep up appearances. Paranoia, maybe. Smart, definitely. Isaac, meanwhile, was busy playing America's favorite son. His Facebook page had transformed into a timeline of weaponized grief. He posted old photos. He shared inspirational quotes. He reshared missing person flyers with hashtags like "Bring Mom Home" and "Co-op's Mental Health Matters." I nearly choked on my tea reading that one. But the comments section, that's where the gold lived. "New, praying for you and your mom, Isaac. Such a good son. I'm sure she's just confused. She's lucky to have you." It was like watching a bad play where the villain wears a halo and the audience throws roses. And the worst part, he wasn't even sweating yet. But he would be. Because while he was busy feeding the public sympathy soup, I was preparing a main course of federal inquiry. The DOJ hadn't responded to the anonymous file I sent yet, but Mark assured me that was normal. Bureaucracy moves like molasses in January, especially when you're not rich or loud. But we weren't in a hurry. Let the story simmer. Then came the first real crack. Another letter arrived. This one wasn't from Isaac. It was from the county courthouse in Dayton. Certified, signed for, official. I opened it on the kitchen table with trembling fingers and a dull steak knife. I don't know why I didn't use scissors. Maybe it felt more appropriate, like cutting open a wound. Isaac had filed a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent. The letter included sworn statements from 2 people, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in over a year, and one of Isaac's college friends, someone I barely remembered. They claimed I had been confused, erratic, and emotionally unstable in recent months. And then came the kicker. Attached were audio clips, snippets of voicemails I had left Isaac over the last year, edited, spliced, completely stripped of context. There I was, crying in one, rambling in another, asking if he still loved me in a third. When you stitch those together, you don't get a mother. You get a headline. He even included a psychiatric opinion from a doctor I'd never met, suggesting I showed signs of paranoia and potential dementia. I sat back in my chair, hands shaking, pulse roaring in my ears. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was war. I called Mark, voice flat. It started. He drove down that night, arriving just past sunset with a suitcase full of files and a thermos of something dark and strong. He read everything, lips pressed into a thin line. "We've got work to do," he said. "But you need to be calm. They're counting on panic." "I'm not panicking," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sharpening." The next few days turned into preparation mode. Mark brought in another lawyer, Monica Cho, a litigator with a voice like sandpaper and a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. We gathered everything, my medical records, a log of every phone call I made the week before I left, receipts from the transfer of lottery funds into the blind trust, a signed affidavit from the night nurse who helped me leave, financial statements, video calls recorded with Mark. Then came the most important piece, a real psychiatric evaluation. We scheduled an appointment with Dr. Naomi Kessler, a specialist with a reputation for accuracy and zero patience for theatrics. She arrived at the house in sensible shoes, carrying a tablet and a fountain pen. Our conversation lasted 3 hours. She asked about my childhood, my marriage, Isaac, the facility, the lottery, the decisions I'd made. She didn't interrupt. She didn't nod too much. She listened. When we finished, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Eleanor, you are the most lucid person I've seen all month." I nearly wept. Old age wisdom. Sanity doesn't always come wrapped in calm. Sometimes it comes cloaked in righteous fury and legal folders. Quirky fact. In Switzerland, it's illegal to own just one guinea pig. They get lonely, which is sweet, sure. But here I was, legally being treated like a confused liability, while Isaac played the media like a fiddle. That night, I sat on my porch, the cold creeping into my slippers, and recorded a video on the burner phone. Not for the public. Not yet. Just in case. "My name is Eleanor Grace Taylor. I am of sound mind. I was betrayed by my son. I am not unstable. I am awake. And I am watching." I saved it to a hard drive and tucked it into the fireproof box. I didn't want justice. Not yet. I wanted Isaac to wonder, to lose sleep, to second-guess every lie he told. Because when the hearing came, I wasn't going to show up as a victim. I was going to show up as the storm. The day of the hearing arrived cloaked in grey skies and the kind of wind that makes you wonder if the world's trying to warn you about something. I dressed deliberately, not to impress, but to declare. A navy coat with silver buttons, my late husband's watch. Low black heels that clicked on linoleum like they had something to say. Mark and Monica flanked me on either side as we walked through the courthouse entrance. No makeup, no jewelry, just me, plain and firm and alive. I didn't need to be glamorized. I needed to be believed. Isaac was already inside, seated at the front. His lawyer, a young man with too much gel and too little soul, stood beside him flipping through folders. Isaac turned when I entered. He stood like he was honoring me somehow. "Mom," he said, as if the word could still soften something in me. I didn't answer, just looked through him. The judge, a man named Harlan, with more tired years on the bench than hair on his head, opened the hearing by reading the case title, "In the Matter of Eleanor Grace Taylor's Mental Competency." I could have laughed. The only person who ever questioned my sanity was the one who had the most to gain from it. Isaac's lawyer went first. He painted me as a confused woman, likely taken advantage of, possibly even being manipulated. He introduced the audio clips, carefully curated moments of vulnerability from voicemails. He referenced the psychiatric opinion of Dr. Kendall, a man who had never spoken to me, but somehow had firm conclusions. Then Isaac spoke. "I love my mother," he said, his voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I truly believe she's not herself anymore. I think someone has gotten to her. She's not thinking clearly. This, this isn't the mom I know. And for once he was right. This wasn't the mom he knew, because the mum, he knew the one who gave until there was nothing left, who wrote checks with shaking hands, who smiled through disappointment. She was gone. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, "do you have a statement?" I stood, walked slowly to the witness stand, folder in hand. "My name is Eleanor Grace Taylor. I am 63 years old. I taught art history for over 2 decades. I have paid my taxes, raised a son, buried a husband, and until recently trusted the wrong people." I opened the folder. "I'd like to submit the results of a recent independent psychiatric evaluation performed by Dr. Naomi Kessler, certified, signed, and recorded in full. She determined I am of sound mind, emotionally stable, and capable of making my own decisions." Mark handed the document to the court clerk. The judge scanned it, then nodded. I kept going. "I also have phone records, bank transactions, a notarized affidavit from a medical staff member who witnessed my voluntary departure from Willow Glen Senior Living, and receipts clear-dated tract of every financial decision I've made since leaving that facility." Then I paused. "I also have one more thing," I said, "but I won't be presenting it unless necessary." Isaac's lawyer perked up. "I have evidence," I continued, "of fraudulent activity involving loans, false tax filings, and signatures not my own. I won't share it unless this court decides I'm unfit to manage my own affairs. But make no mistake, if that door opens, I will walk through it with everything I have." The room went still. Even Isaac looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I turned to the judge. "This man," I said, pointing toward my son, "took my phone, my freedom, and tried to rewrite my story with lies and paperwork. I'm asking you not to let him succeed. Old age wisdom. The same hands that raised you can also write your downfall." And quirky fact. The word testify comes from the Latin testis, meaning witness. I didn't just come to speak, I came to testify. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I'll need time to review all documents and the evaluation," he said. "We will reconvene in 2 weeks." 2 weeks, a small eternity. As the session ended, Isaac tried to meet my eyes again. But this time his smile didn't stick. He looked shaken. And not in the teary "I just want what's best for my mum" kind of way. No, this was the face of a man who realized the mask he wore was starting to crack, that the script he'd rehearsed was beginning to unravel. I left the courtroom with my spine straight and my heels clicking. I wasn't just defending myself, I was beginning to hunt. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a satisfying clang, like punctuation on a sentence I refused to let someone else finish. I didn't say a word to Mark or Monica on the walk back to the car. I didn't need to. They saw it too. The shift. But Isaac, he didn't stop. If anything, the 2-week window made him bold. By the time we pulled back into my driveway, news had already broken online. A local Dayton news station ran a segment titled "Missing Mother Reappears. In Court Son Claims She's Being Exploited." There was Isaac again, practically begging for an Oscar, all furrowed brow and moist eyes. "I just want my mum to be okay," he told the camera. "She's been through a lot. She's confused. And I worry people are taking advantage of her kindness." The nerve of it. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about exposure. And while the public gobbled up his performance, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to punch through drywall. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and watched every frame of his interview. That's when I made the decision. No more silence. No more hiding behind Mark or Monica or burner phones. It was time to tell my story. I called Sarah Benson. She was the investigative journalist who'd reached out weeks ago after seeing rumors swirling on elder advocacy message boards. We'd spoken briefly off the record, but I had declined to go public. Until now. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm ready," I said. A pause. To talk. To be heard. We met in a town 2 hours over in a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. I wore a scarf, sunglasses, and a plain grey coat. She wore empathy folded into every question. No names, I reminded her. No photos, not yet. She nodded. I want your truth, not your headline. So I told her about the birthday that ended in a locked facility, the suitcase packed without my knowledge, the power of attorney I didn't sign, the lottery ticket that changed everything but didn't save me. I left out the exact amount. I didn't mention the DOJ file, but I said enough to crack something open. Sarah sat in stunned silence after I finished her recorder blinking quietly on the table. You know, she said softly, this isn't just a story about money. It's about dignity. Exactly, I said. People think elder abuse is bruises and bed sores, but it's also paperwork, isolation, the slow erasure of autonomy. She promised discretion. The article ran 2 days later. Mother or millionaire, the silencing of Eleanor T. It didn't name me, it didn't name Isaac, but people talk, people connect dots. And online the tide began to shift. Comments popped up beneath Isaac's original post. Why hasn't she said anything herself? Something about this doesn't feel right. If she's so confused, how did she show up in court with a lawyer and medical files? I didn't respond, didn't need to, because while Isaac tried to build a tower of pity, I was setting fire to the foundation beneath him. Then came the break I'd been waiting for. Mark received a call from a contact at the Department of Justice. They'd received the anonymous package I sent, and they were opening a formal inquiry. No subpoenas yet, no headlines. But it was real. Isaac didn't know it, of course. He was too busy holding press conferences and posting filtered family photos. But while he painted himself as the grieving son of a confused mother, the feds were quietly unspooling the threads behind the scenes. That night, I cooked myself a proper meal for the first time in weeks. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with too much garlic. I lit a candle, played old jazz. Ate alone, but not lonely. Because here's the thing they never tell you about betrayal. Once it burns away the illusion, you're left with something sharp, something strong. The next morning, I sat down and began outlining a plan for a foundation. Not just a donation, not a sympathy gesture, something real. The Eleanor Trust, a non-profit dedicated to protecting elderly individuals from financial and legal abuse. Not with pamphlets, with lawyers, hotlines, investigators, backup. Isaac thought I was done, but I was just beginning. Old age wisdom. When you survive something big, you have two choices, hide or help. And today's off-topic fact. In France, there's a law that allows elderly parents to sue their children for lack of support. Honestly, tempting. Before bed, I checked the article one more time. The comments were still pouring in. People sharing stories of betrayal, abandonment, forced care homes. One woman wrote, "This could have been my mum." Thank you, Eleanor T. I closed the laptop. Not with closure, with conviction. 2 days after the article went live, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. Not the burner I used to check weather and order groceries, but the secure line Mark had set up. Only a handful of people had that number. I froze mid-step in the hallway, the screen glowing with a blocked ID. My hand hovered. Then I picked up. "This is Eleanor," I said. A woman's voice answered, smooth and clipped. "Mrs. Taylor, I'm calling on behalf of the Department of Justice. We've reviewed the materials you submitted and would like to request a formal statement." I leaned against the wall. My knees didn't buckle, but they noticed. "Understood," I replied. "Let's set a time." They did. 2 agents met me at Mark's office that Friday. Not men in black, but quiet professionals with clean notebooks and quiet shoes. One led the questioning, while the other took notes. They didn't act surprised by anything I said, which somehow made it worse. They'd seen this before. They'd heard stories like mine, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some didn't end as cleanly, some never got told at all. I handed over a full copy of my files, every forged loan, every falsified tax return, every edited voicemail, and every digital breadcrumb that pointed straight to Isaac. At the end of the meeting, the lead agent folded his notebook shut and looked at me. "This is solid," he said, "and deeply disturbing." Academic phrase of the day. The evidentiary burden for financial exploitation cases involving next of kin is notoriously high, but we were stacking it like Jenga. Mark drove me home afterward. We didn't talk much until the car pulled up to my little red brick cottage. "You did good," he said. "I did right," I corrected. That weekend, I received another letter. Unmarked envelope, plain paper. But this time, no threats. Just a photograph. It was from my 60th birthday. I was laughing at the kitchen table icing smeared on my cheek. Isaac beside me, cake knife in hand. On the back in his handwriting, "You always believed in me." I'm sorry that wasn't enough. I stared at that sentence until the sun went down. Then I lit a fire and burned the photo. Not out of hate, out of necessity, because belief without boundaries is just a door with no lock. He had crossed too many. The next morning, I finalized the foundation. The Eleanor Trust would be registered in 3 states. We'd hire 2 attorneys to start, plus a hotline coordinator. The mission: provide legal and financial assistance to elders facing manipulation, coercion, or stealthy asset seizure, especially by family members. I even emailed Sarah again, this time with a press packet. She called me 30 minutes later. "Are you serious?" she asked. "As heart failure," I said. The story ran nationally within a week. No names, but everyone who'd been watching knew exactly who it was about. A woman betrayed by her son, rejected, erased, and left behind, who clawed her way back with paper proof and pure nerve. Comments poured in again. This time it wasn't sympathy. It was solidarity. My aunt went through the same thing. My brother tried to control my mum's money after her stroke. My father-in-law was put in a home by his kids and stripped of everything. And then finally the call came. Mark's contact at DOJ confirmed it. Brandon No Isaac was officially being charged. Wire fraud, tax evasion, forgery, identity theft. Not speculation, not whispers. Charges filed. It didn't make the front page, but it didn't need to. The people who needed to know, they knew. The banks, his clients, his wife. Oh yes, his wife. She released a statement the next day via her attorney naturally. She was filing for divorce and seeking full custody of their daughter, citing irreconcilable betrayal. That part caught in my throat, because it wasn't just me. It was his own child too. Old age wisdom. People rarely do something awful just once. The pattern is always longer than you think. And quirky fact, the average sea turtle can live over 100 years. But they bury their eggs and never return to see them hatch. Nature has its way of letting go. Isaac's world crumbled quietly. His law license suspended. Business accounts frozen. His face on local news accompanied by the phrase, "under investigation." I didn't watch the broadcasts. I didn't need to. Instead, I took a walk around the neighborhood, bought a cinnamon bun at the bakery run by 2 sisters who always wear mismatched earrings, watched a dog chase its own tail on a corner lawn, breathed. Not freedom exactly, but justice freshly baked. When I got home, I added one final folder to my fireproof box, labeled "Closure Pending." 2 weeks later, I found myself back in the same courtroom, same judge, same wood-paneled walls, same clunky fan overhead that hummed like an old refrigerator trying to stay relevant. But the energy different. This time, Isaac walked in without the bounce in his step. His shoulders hunched slightly. His eyes darted around the room like a man who knew the ground beneath him had started to crack. His lawyer looked more serious too, less slick, more braced. Mark and Monica sat beside me, files perfectly stacked, posture immaculate. Me. I wore the same navy coat, same silver buttons. But under it, a necklace I hadn't worn in years. Richard's wedding band, strung on a thin chain around my neck, not for show, for spine. Judge Harlan began with no small talk. "We're reconvened on the matter of Eleanor Grace Taylor's competency. Counsel, proceed." Mark stood first. "Your Honor?" He began since our last hearing. We've submitted a full psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Naomi Kessler, which you've reviewed. In addition, we've provided digital and physical documentation establishing Mrs. Taylor's independent actions over the last 2 months, including the creation and legal filing of a charitable trust property management and controlled financial transfers, none of which exhibit confusion or impairment. Then, without dramatic pause or flourish, he added, "Also, Your Honor, the petitioner. Mr. Isaac Taylor is currently under federal investigation for identity theft, wire fraud, and multiple counts of tax-related fraud. These are public filings." He slid the court copy across the table with the subtle finality of someone placing the last domino. Isaac's attorney jumped up predictably. "That investigation is irrelevant to the question of competency. It has no bearing." The judge held up a single finger. "Sit." He did. The courtroom went still. Then came the moment I'd been bracing for. Dr. Kessler was called to testify. She walked to the stand with the calm authority of someone who had no use for drama. Her testimony was crisp, professional, and unmistakably clear. Mrs. Taylor shows no evidence of cognitive decline. She is lucid, mentally stable, and fully capable of making autonomous legal and financial decisions. There is no indication of manipulation or duress. "Would you say she was of sound mind when she left the senior living facility?" "I would," Dr. Kessler replied. "In fact, I'd say she was one of the most self-aware clients I've evaluated this year." Mike dropped. Next came the timeline. Mark presented it like a documentary script, the dates when Isaac began shifting accounts, the days he pulled large amounts from his failing business. Each transaction layered on top of my supposed memory lapses. All too perfectly timed. Coincidence? Hardly. Then, for the final nail, Monica called in our surprise witness, Lila. She appeared in a modest blouse ID badge, still clipped to her belt, and told the story of how I'd left, voluntarily, calmly, with full awareness of what I was doing and why. She wasn't confused, Lila said. She was determined. Scared, yes, but clear. And then it was Isaac's turn. He stood slowly, face tight. "My mother is sick," he said, voice cracking in a way I now knew was rehearsed. "She's being coached. She's been acting erratically for a long time. This entire show she's putting on, it's not her." I stood. "Your Honor, may I respond?" The judge nodded. I walked to the front. Slowly, purposefully. No rush, no fear. I turned toward Isaac. Looked him straight in the face. "I am her," I said. "I'm the woman who stayed up with you when you had the flu at age 5, who sewed your Halloween costumes and made peanut butter pancakes for test days. I'm the one who pawned her wedding ring to cover your tuition check. And you left me in a locked facility on my birthday, took my phone, took my rights, took my trust." I turned to the judge, and now he wants to take my mind. The silence in that courtroom was so complete you could have heard a regret fall. Judge Harlan steepled his fingers, leaned forward, and spoke slowly. "Mrs. Taylor, based on the overwhelming evidence provided your psychiatric evaluation and the inconsistencies in the petitioner's claims, I am dismissing this case. Your financial accounts and personal autonomy are fully restored. This court recognizes you as competent and independent." I didn't cry, but I did blink, twice. Mark smiled slightly. Monica exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 2 weeks. Isaac didn't say a word as I walked past him, but I saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the way his knuckles gripped the chair. The cracks were becoming canyons, old age wisdom. When people start trying to rewrite your ending, pick up the pen yourself. And quirky fact, the oldest living tree in the world is a bristlecone pine over 4,800 years old, and it's still growing. Don't ever count out the old ones. I left the courthouse that day, not just with my dignity intact, but with something better. Leverage. Because while Isaac had spent months trying to prove I was unfit, I had been building something much more dangerous. A paper trail. And now, it was his turn to run. The next morning I woke up to birdsong. Not metaphorically. Not as some poetic sign of rebirth. Just actual birds, loud ones, perched on the gutter outside my bedroom window and arguing like they were rehearsing for a sitcom pilot. It was obnoxious, and somehow it felt like a gift, because for the first time in months I wasn't waking up with a court date or a legal file looming over my head. I wasn't a case number. I wasn't a ghost. I was a woman, with coffee, in a bathrobe. But don't get me wrong, relief isn't the same as peace. Relief is temporary. It fades. And as much as I wanted to melt into the couch and pretend all of this was behind me, I knew better. Isaac hadn't shown his full hand yet. And until the DOJ hit him with something hard, he'd still try to spin the story. So I beat him to it. I called Sarah. "I want to do the interview," I said, on camera. No aliases, no filters. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm done hiding." We filmed the next Friday in a quiet studio 2 counties over. She kept the lights low, the crew small. Just me and a chair, and the lens that felt like an eye I could finally look into without blinking. She started soft. "Eleanor, the world knows bits and pieces of your story. But what don't they know? I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need to. I think people assume being old means being confused," I said. "That grief and trauma warp us into shadows of ourselves. But what happened to me wasn't about age. It was about power." I told her everything. The nursing home, the forged documents, the lottery ticket, the DOJ file. Even the letter Isaac had sent with the photo, his final attempt to twist the knife and frame it as an apology. I watched Sarah's eyes widen, but she didn't interrupt. She let the truth stack up like bricks one on top of the other until the shape of the real story stood tall. "Why now?" she asked. "Because silence isn't survival," I said. "And because I know there's someone watching this, some mother or aunt or grandmother who's been told she's confused one too many times." That interview aired nationally the following week. It was quiet, measured, no background music, just my voice. And it blew up. Not viral in the way cats wearing sunglasses do. Viral in the way real pain goes when people finally feel seen. Comments, emails, letters. A woman in Florida who'd been manipulated by her son into selling her house. A retired teacher in Seattle whose daughter had power of attorney and used it to drain her retirement. A woman in Kansas who simply wrote, "You said everything I couldn't." I sat with each one. I replied when I could. And when I couldn't, I lit a candle and whispered a name. Because being heard is one thing, but being believed, that's what people crave. And then the phone rang again. "Mark this time. They're filing," he said. "DOJ just confirmed. Formal charges. Isaac Taylor, under federal indictment. 10 counts. Wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, tax evasion." He was arrested quietly, no dramatic front lawn takedown. But the press found out fast. His mugshot hit local news within hours. The comments turned quick. "Isn't this the same guy who went on TV crying? His poor mum. I hope she's okay. Let her tell her story. She deserves to speak." But I already had, and now I was done talking about Isaac. Because this next part was mine. Old age wisdom. Closure doesn't come when they say sorry. It comes when you realize you don't need them to. Quirky fact of the day. A jellyfish has no heartbrain or bones, just nerve endings and instinct. And somehow it survives. Sometimes that's enough. That weekend, I walked into the town centre for the first time since the interview aired. People recognized me. They didn't whisper or gawk. They nodded, smiled. A woman in her 40s reached out gently. "My mum left her second husband because of your story," she said. "Thank you." At the pharmacy, the teen behind the counter slipped a note into my bag. "My grandma says you gave her courage." I didn't know how to react, so I just smiled. I hadn't asked for any of this. I didn't want fame or sympathy. I wanted space, truth, and maybe a decent cinnamon roll without a side of legal trauma. But I wasn't going to waste the moment either. That night, I pulled out the Eleanor Trust folder. I made a checklist. Legal team expansion, secure funding source, national hotline, outreach strategy for care facilities, legislative lobbying plan. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was a blueprint. Because if they tried to erase me and I came back with a voice, what could we do? If we all spoke up? What if silence wasn't the default anymore? What if the next woman didn't need a lottery ticket to be heard? It didn't happen with headlines or handcuffs. It happened at 12:43 p.m. on a Wednesday, with a push notification that popped up on my burner phone like a little whisper of cosmic timing. Brandon Taylor accepts federal plea deal. Sentenced to 10 years. I read it twice. Then once more, just for my heart. 10 years. No trial. No drawn-out drama. Just a quiet acknowledgement of guilt wrapped in legal jargon and white-collar language. Mark called an hour later. He took the deal. Pleaded out. No appeal. It's over. Is it? I asked. There was a pause. For him, probably not. But for you, it can be. I hung up and stood by the window. The wind was moving the bare trees again the same way it did when I first arrived here. But now it sounded different. Not like it was warning me. Like it was clearing something out. Later that afternoon, I found an envelope tucked under my front door. No stamp. No handwriting on the outside. Just white, clean quiet. Inside a blank sheet of paper and a single Polaroid photo. Me aged maybe 40, holding a toddler on my hip. Isaac. Grinning, gummy-mouthed, grabbing at my earrings. On the back, just 2 words scrawled in the corner. I remember. I didn't cry. But my hands trembled. Because what do you even do with that? I thought about throwing it away. Then thought about burning it. Then finally I slid it into a drawer I rarely opened right between my wedding ring and the key to the fireproof box. Some ghosts don't need exorcising. They just need to be kept somewhere safe where they can't bite anymore. That night I lit a candle. Not for forgiveness, but for finality. Because it wasn't just Isaac's prison that mattered. It was my freedom, and I had it now. The next week, I stood before a small, modest crowd in Montgomery. The Eleanor Trust's first official press conference. No glitz, no branding, just folding chairs and a shared purpose. I wore a grey sweater, no makeup, a lapel pin shaped like a key. Mark introduced me. The audience, mostly journalists, non-profit volunteers, and a few residents from the facility where I once stayed, clapped as I stepped forward. Thank you, I said. Not just for being here, but for hearing. I paused, took a breath. I'm not here because I won something. I'm here because I survived something. And because too many don't. I spoke about financial abuse, about silence, about the slow erosion of autonomy that doesn't look like violence, but feels like it. Then I gave the hard numbers. Over 5 million cases of elder financial exploitation each year in the US. Only 1 in 44 are ever reported. The majority are perpetrated by family members. Academic debate phrase of the day. If we fail to view aging populations as autonomous agents, we enable systemic vulnerabilities with generational consequences. There was a long silence after I finished. Then someone clapped, and someone else. And then a room of voices joined mine. Afterward, Ruby found me. She had driven down with 2 other nurses from Willow Glen. Her braids were longer now, streaked with gold thread. Her eyes were the same sharp, warm, defiant. We hugged like family. I saw the interview, she said. Then I saw the news. I had to come. Thank you, I said. She shook her head. No, thank you. We restructured everything at Willow. New policies, new staff training. We even named the new reading room after Doris. That part stopped me. My throat tightened. You did that. You started it, she said. The next day, I mailed letters to everyone who helped me. Mark, Monica, Dr. Kessler, Sarah, Ruby. Even Lila's cousin who helped with the paperwork for my trust and refused to take a cent for it. Each letter started with the same line. Thank you for standing next to me while I remembered who I was. Because that was the truth. I hadn't found justice alone. I'd been witnessed back into existence. Old age wisdom, sometimes the only way out is through someone else's hand. And quirky fact, sea otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart. Don't tell me gentleness isn't a survival skill. I spent the last days of that year quietly. I cooked. I wrote. I adopted a cat who sleeps in my laundry basket like it's a royal throne. I went on walks. I answered letters. I stopped checking Isaac's name in search results. I stopped watching the door. Because the scariest part of surviving betrayal isn't what they did, it's learning how to live after. And I was finally starting to learn. The first snowfall of the new year arrived without ceremony, just soft, slow flakes drifting through the pale morning air like they had nowhere better to be. I watched from my kitchen window, a mug of tea in hand, and my feet warm inside oversized wool socks I'd knitted years ago and forgotten about. The quiet was deep, almost sacred. No cars, no headlines, no lawyers. Just the subtle groan of the floorboards and the occasional tick from the wall clock that always ran 3 minutes fast. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I wrote a letter to myself. Just a page. Just to see what I'd say. It started with "Dear Eleanor, you made it." Because sometimes you need to be reminded not just that you survived, but that you kept walking long after the fire went out. Later that week, I received an invitation in the mail. A speaking engagement in DC, a national elder care conference. Apparently someone on the planning committee had read about the Eleanor Trust. I was being asked to present. Not as a victim, not even as a founder, as an expert. I stared at the envelope like it was some kind of trick. Then I laughed out loud. A sharp, honest laugh that cracked the winter silence. I'd gone from being locked away in a care facility to standing behind a podium on the other side of the country holding court on a subject I never wanted to be qualified to speak on. That's the twist, isn't it? You don't choose the stories that shape you, but you do choose what you do with the pen once the damage is done. Mark insisted on coming. You need someone to handle logistics, he said, and someone to glare at people who underestimate you. I didn't argue. Ruby joined us too. She wore a blazer for the first time in her life and kept tugging at the sleeves like they were lying about who she really was. The conference room was packed policymakers, care workers, lawyers, even a few senators' aides. A woman in her 70s came up to me before I even spoke and said, "You're the reason I filed my own paperwork last month." I nodded. My voice wouldn't work yet. Then it was time. I stepped to the microphone in a room where I once would have felt invisible. Now every eye turned to me, not because I had power, but because I had truth. I spoke about the traps we set for older people, how we infantilize them under the guise of care, how silence is rarely chosen, but almost always enforced, how family isn't always safety and betrayal often hides inside warm holiday photos and well-meaning signatures. I ended with this. Being elderly doesn't mean being irrelevant. It means having lived through too many stories to be written out of your own. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, respectful, lasting. That night, I sat in the hotel room staring out at the city lights. Ruby snored gently on the bed beside me, half wrapped in the conference swag blanket. Mark typed emails from the corner. I pulled out my notebook and added a new entry. Next phase, community legal clinics. Rural access, state partnerships. Because if the system wasn't going to protect people like me, I'd build one that would. Old age wisdom. Anger is a good spark. But if you want to change the world, you'll need something steadier like strategy. And quirky fact. There's a species of jellyfish that can technically live forever. It reverts back to its juvenile state instead of dying. Scientists call it biological immortality. I call it one hell of a metaphor. Because I wasn't looking for a second youth. I was building a second life. By spring, we had opened our first legal support branch in Ohio, right back where it all started. We partnered with the ACLU, with a local women's shelter, and with a senior advocacy group that had once turned me down when I reached out for help. This time, they asked us to collaborate. Isaac's name faded from the news after a few months. He served his time quietly, no appeals, No public statements. His wife finalized the divorce and moved out west with their daughter. I never saw either of them again. But one day I did receive a letter, typed neat, from the warden at Isaac's facility. It simply said, "Inmate 62741 has requested that no further contact be initiated with Eleanor Taylor. He has declined all visitation and correspondence." I stared at the page for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it in the very back of the fireproof box. Behind the documents. Behind the will. Behind the photo he'd once sent. Some endings don't need punctuation. Just space. Spring crept in, slowly brushing green across the yard, like someone cautiously testing the waters after a long winter of silence. Daffodils pushed through the soil by the porch steps. The cat, now firmly named Jasper, spent his days sunbathing in the windowsills like he paid rent. I'd settled into a rhythm tea in the morning, trust meetings by noon, quiet dinners, long walks. My life no longer swung on crisis, but it hadn't settled into peace either. Not yet. Because healing isn't symmetrical. It doesn't arrive in a neat bow or a phone call saying, "Congratulations, you're okay now." Sometimes it comes in the form of jury duty notices that no longer fill you with dread. Sometimes it comes in the silence not broken by unexpected knocks. One morning I returned to Willow Glen, not for nostalgia, not even for closure, just to see it on my terms. It looked cleaner. New coat of paint, new staff uniforms, lighter furniture. The old bulletin board had been replaced with a digital screen looping announcements and photos of recent events. Lila met me at the door. "You came back," she said, smiling. "Couldn't stay away." She gave me the tour. We passed a new therapy room, a renovated reading lounge named after Doris. There was even a quiet corner with puzzles chess and a tea station real tea, not that watered-down stuff they used to serve in foam cups. I was proud, not just of what it had become, but of who I was as I walked through it. Not a patient, not a victim, not a resident. A reformer, Ruby had moved up to head of programs. Lila worked part-time now in nursing school and on track to become a full geriatric care coordinator. I gave her a scholarship through the trust. Quietly. She didn't even know. They asked if I wanted to speak to the residents. At first I hesitated. Then I nodded. There was no podium. Just a circle of chairs half filled with people who carried their lives in their eyes. I sat with them. No separation, no performance. Most of us were taught to be polite, I began. To go along. To not cause a scene. But what they didn't tell us is that politeness won't save you when someone decides to speak for you. They nodded. And I saw it, the moment it landed. Your life doesn't end because someone else says so. And you are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. Applause came quietly. From hands with arthritis and memories they don't always share. But I felt it. The gratitude. The recognition. Later, Ruby pressed a photo into my hand. It was of the new reading lounge. Framed photos lined one wall, residents past and present. And right there in the middle, tucked between a shelf of classic novels and a vase of fresh flowers, was a brass plaque. Donated by the Eleanor Trust, in honor of the voices once silenced. I didn't cry, but something in me melted. Back at home, I returned to work. We were opening 2 more trust chapters, one in Michigan, one in North Carolina. The hotline had taken over 1,000 calls. Half of them turned into full investigations. Several had already led to charges. We were making a dent, not a crater, not yet. But enough. Sarah sent me a copy of her follow-up article, Eleanor Taylor from Erased to Empowered. I hated the title, but I appreciated the honesty. She wrote about systemic failure, about how abuse hides under warmth, about how justice isn't just about courtrooms, it's about reclaiming self. She quoted me directly. Silence was never my weakness. It was their weapon. One line stuck with me, though, more than the others. It came near the end. Margaret Taylor didn't fight to be loud. She fought to be left alone, and then chose to speak anyway. Margaret. She'd gotten the name wrong. I almost called to correct her. Then I didn't, because maybe Margaret was someone else now. Maybe she was all of us. Maybe she was the woman watching from a small apartment, unsure if she can still trust her son with her bank card. Or the grandfather who stopped signing papers without reading them, no matter how rushed the nurse seemed. Or the couple in assisted living who rewrote their wills without telling anyone. Maybe Margaret was bigger than me. Old age wisdom. Some stories don't belong to you once you speak them aloud. They belong to everyone who needed them. And quirky fact. There's a species of tree, the quaking aspen, that looks like a forest, but is actually one organism connected by a single root system. Dozens of trunks, but only one soul. That's what we were now. Not alone. Just finally aware that we were standing together. The photo Sarah used for the article was quiet. No makeup. Grey cardigan. My hands folded in my lap. I looked like someone who could be waiting for a bus or leading a revolution. I printed it, framed it, and hung it right above the fireplace, beside the letter I'd written to myself that snowy morning. Because survival deserves witnesses. Even if one of them is you. I spent New Year's Eve alone by choice. Not lonely, just deliberately, blissfully alone. The house was quiet, except for Jasper's content purring at my feet, and the gentle crackle of the fire. I had a glass of cider in hand, a fleece blanket over my knees, and an old movie playing on low volume, not because I was watching it, but because I liked the sound of someone else's story. Midnight came and went, without confetti or champagne or anyone yelling countdowns. Just me. A 64-year-old woman who had walked through fire carrying a folder instead of a torch. The last thing I did before heading to bed was open the small wooden box I kept on the mantel. Inside my original will now outdated. My folded lottery confirmation. A faded post-it from Mark that just said, "Breathe. We've got you." And the letter to myself. I read it again slowly. Dear Eleanor, you weren't crazy. You weren't too trusting. You weren't weak. You were just a woman who loved too deeply. And when they tried to write you out of your own life, you picked up the pen and wrote the ending yourself. I am so proud of you. With love, yourself. I added a new note beneath it on clean paper. Dear whoever finds this, if you're reading this because something went wrong, please know I didn't go quietly, and neither should you. I sealed the box again. That was my legacy. Not the money, not the court case, not the trust, or the interviews, or even the photos people now shared with hashtags about resilience. It was the fact that when everything fell apart, I built something from the pieces, something solid, something for others. The Eleanor Trust grew. That spring, we hired 2 full-time attorneys and expanded to 5 states. We partnered with credit unions, legal aid clinics, and small-town churches, where seniors often turned first when something didn't feel right but didn't know where else to go. We built bridges. Not just legal ones, human ones. We trained staff to recognize manipulation that looked like love. We taught caretakers to pause before assuming. We taught families to listen to really listen when someone said something didn't feel right. One evening, I gave a talk at a retirement center that had once refused to help me years ago. The director pulled me aside afterward, hands wringing. You were right, she said, and I'm sorry. I nodded, not with smugness, but with grace. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair, old age wisdom. Bitterness is a terrible inheritance to leave behind, but clarity, that's a gift. And quirky fact. The oldest living message in a bottle was found 132 years after it was sent. Imagine that words floating, waiting, surviving, like truth. I started writing again. Not legal drafts or affidavits, but essays, stories, reflections. One was published in a national journal. Another became the basis of a TED-style talk. I called it The Cost of Being Quiet. In it, I shared this. People think survival is dramatic, loud, cinematic. But real survival is quiet. It's choosing not to fold the day after everything's been taken. It's sipping tea while reading your own legal filings. It's buying groceries with cash because your accounts are frozen and still remembering to smile at the cashier. It's the smallest acts of rebellion that stitch a life back together. And it worked. People started listening differently. I got letters from social workers who changed how they approached elder clients, from adult children who apologized to their parents, from people who rewrote their own power of attorney forms, this time in pencil, until they felt sure. Isaac never wrote again. Not from prison, not through lawyers, not through friends. He vanished in a way. Or maybe I just stopped looking. Either way, the silence felt final and peaceful. On my 65th birthday, I woke to a knock on the door. Not from fear, from Ruby. She held a cake she'd baked herself, slightly lopsided and full of walnuts I'd once told her I hated. I laughed. She grinned. "Guess I'm still learning," she said. We ate on the porch. Just the two of us. Two women who had seen too much, lost too much, and yet somehow found something that looked a lot like home. The sun set slow, like it wanted to linger. When Ruby left, I stood at the edge of the porch and looked out over my quiet yard. I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel broken. I felt full, because I had turned silence into strength, and survival into story. And now I was free. Thank you for spending the evening with me. This story began with a suitcase packed without permission, handed to a woman who had given her life to a son she thought she knew. But betrayal has many disguises. And silence. It's not always submission. It's sometimes just the pause before the storm. Eleanor's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. From the quiet hallways of a care facility to the courtroom, from late-night voicemails edited into weaponry to handwritten letters of quiet defiance, this was the story of someone who refused to disappear, who chose to fight, not with fists, but with paper patience and a voice rediscovered. And through it all, there were helpers. Mark, Ruby, Lila, people who didn't try to save her, but instead stood beside her while she saved herself. The Eleanor trust is fiction, but the need it fills, tragically real. So tonight, if there's one thing I hope you carry into your dreams, it's this: your voice matters. Even when they try to take it. Even when they call you confused or dramatic or difficult. Especially then. So rest now. You've heard the story. You've witnessed the rising. You've stood beside someone who was nearly erased and watched her redraw her name, bold, centered, undeniable. Now let the fire dim. Let your breath slow. Let the world blur at the edges. You are not alone. You are not finished. You are not forgotten. Good night.